Welcome to the Maverick Podcast. I am your host, Kathy Rose. And once again, a big shout out to all the independent thinkers out there and all the free spirits. And as a matter of fact, when I mention free spirits, I am directly relating to the guest we have today, which is Pete A. Sanders Jr. He's been on the show before, and he is the founder of an organization called Free Soul. So, Pete, if you want to come on in.
Thank you for having me from beautiful Sedona.
Very nice. Well, so nice to have you back again. Pete is a free spirit and a free soul. He founded an organization back in the 80s, nonprofit public education program designed to teach people to develop their intuition, develop their spiritual skills, and be free, right?
I think what I always tell people is all of our books and DVDs have on the cover the free soul method, and that it's not me or even the foundation that refers to. It refers to the ideal that people deserve instruction in this field that sets them free to joyously journey as they go through life, even with difficult things like healing past life soul bruises, that it can be a happy, freeing, not just a heavy experience.
Which is our topic for today. I specifically asked Pete back on the show because one of the things I learned and developed when I was an instructor with Free Soul so many years ago was how to delve into past life, what we call soul bruises, which could be a soul injury or an incompletion or a traumatic incident that took place in a past life that we're working on healing in this life that we're carrying forward. So I'd like to open this topic up to talk about this because you have so many good techniques and so much wisdom in this area.
And I'd like to, first of all, I'm sure that anybody listening to this doesn't have a problem with the concept of past life. But if they live with someone who does or may criticize them because of it, here's how I, as a scientist, an MIT grad, speak to people who say, well, I don't know about this past life stuff. And I say, well, regardless of what your faith is, science says energy can neither be created nor destroyed. You as energy are now, you always have been, and you always will be. The biggest still unknown in brain science, which was one of my principal studies at MIT, is how the wiring of the brain creates consciousness, the way you recognize you as you. And the other thing we've shared in some of the other podcasts, we won't go into it as much, people can go back and watch those, is superstrings physics says we all exist in 10 or more dimensions. So basically science is saying we're more than just this meat. The same way most of an iceberg's below the water, only a little sticks above. The brain and the body may be that above the water part of the iceberg, but superstrings physics says there's this more. And what I say to people is if you think of some of those dimensions beyond as like the layers of a soul pearl, that's where memory and our hurts may be stored, whether it's this life or past life. And they can be like a stone in the shoe, the princess and the pea, if we don't address them.
Yeah, and I think what is so important to understand is when I focus on the potential of past lives or soul bruises, and I know when you do too, it's not from a sensationalistic point of view. It is not, hey, let's talk about what year you may have had a past life, which country, all the details, and the entertainment sensationalistic view. It is primarily, if you think about the possibility of past lives, you're looking at how does that help me now? How is my life and my soul development and my life, how are my life purpose issues perhaps reflecting what has happened in other lifetimes, and how am I trying to heal and develop and release trauma and develop wisdom and core issues like that. So, I mean, I think that's a big distinction, rather than just, let me look at your Akashic records and tell me every lifetime you've ever had.
And I agree wholeheartedly. All too often, the topic is shrouded in phenomena and, ooh, let me tell you what your past life was. The purpose of exploring this should be exactly what you said: how to continue with our growth. I'll explain a little bit later why I use the analogy of the soul pearl and how it relates to superstrength physics. But another analogy science uses for time is a river. And if there's a rotting carcass upstream in your river or your creek, yes, it's upstream in the past, but some of those toxins are still polluting your present. And it doesn't matter if it was an elk, if it was a coyote, was it a mountain lion, was it a buffalo? It doesn't. It's the fact that there's some rotting toxin back there that hasn't been fully addressed and not incorporated into a new beginning. All the molecules that make up that carcass can go to making new plants, new trees, new everything. And that should be the purpose of past life memory work, is how to create new jewels of wisdom from our past.
Yeah. And in the end, is this information helpful? That's really what's important to me. Is it helpful? Because no one can prove past lives. No one can prove what specifically happened or not. And, there are some astrologers who say it is not ethical to even bring past lives up because you can't prove them. And I say you can't prove astrology either, which is amazing to me. But the fact is it helpful? Is it helpful?
Is it practically usable?
Mm-hmm.
When you come back to the purpose being for creating wisdom, that also says don't get lost in the phenomena of exactly where or when. Identify more the circumstances of the bruise. The same way we study history to hopefully learn from it, learning about things we may have experienced can help us be better people. And the analogy I like to make for why it shouldn't be rushed is a construction site. Everybody's seen a construction site and it's a mess. Well, sometimes things are delivered to the construction site before they're ready. There's some construction going on in our neighborhood. And there's a bunch of cinder blocks sitting around, and it's not going to be used for a while till the foundation concrete dries. And it is an eyesore. Now, Kathy knows I kind of like words and wordplay. So it's an eyesore as in EYE, SO, RE. But sometimes we may not have all the pieces in place for putting those cinder blocks into the walls of the house. The rebar may not be there, the different connections. And that can be what I call an me personal sore. Mm-hmm. It can be that stone in the shoe, and just put up with it. Don't push it. And that's why people shouldn't phenomenally rush past life memory. If you rush to put up your cinder blocks without the rebar in between, without the anchoring corners, you're not going to have a strong house. So a lot of times I say to people, let past life memory come in its own right time. And I know we'll probably expand on this later, but I think it's safer to reverse engineer past life memory. And by that, I mean, okay, I have this sensitivity. There is this topic that always seems to cause an anger or hurt in me. What type of past life circumstance could have created it? And in that case, it doesn't really matter. Was it Mesopotamia? Was it Egypt? Was it here? Was I imprisoned? Was I prejudiced against? Was I a priestess who was killed because the chauvinistic priests couldn't stand the fact I had more natural gifts than they did? You know, go for the issues that might have been in that lifetime that created the bruise.
Well, you bring up something that I wanted to discuss, and that is for people who may not feel they can tune into their own past lives or may not have someone who can help them with that. You can learn a lot just by paying attention to where you overreact. For example, reading books, watching movies, seeing things out in the world. I know recently here, I live in Virginia, and recently, just 3-4 days ago, there was that big snowstorm that came in and shut down the highway, I-95, which was close to DC. And people got trapped in their car, some of them for almost 36 hours, but mostly for 24 hours in their car in the cold. Most of them had no supplies. Now, that is a soul bruise for me. And I know it because I react so strongly to any story like that where you're caught off guard without supplies. That sense of always be prepared has been, it's not an irrational thing for me, but it is certainly a pounding drive. So when we go on a road trip, I have total stocks of water. I have lots of food, and I'm planning ahead. Okay, if it gets cold, we need this, this, this. If it's extra warm, we need this, this. I'm always super prepared. And when I was raising my kids, they would laugh at me because I was thinking 25 steps ahead for everything under the sun, every contingency that might happen so I could keep my family safe. When I did past life sensing on it, I really did sense a lifetime where I was the leader of the family, and we went on some journey somehow and got stuck in a weather incident without food, without the appropriate kind of protection, and people suffered big time. So my reaction to any stories like that and my action that I take in order to prevent that, yeah, it's a little overboard, and I have to breathe and remember I'm safe. You can do this reasonably, but these kinds of reactions, this is what I want to talk about. When you watch a movie and you see a theme of persecution or martyrdom or unfairness or huge loss, and you react from your core, it's that overreaction, and you're overreacting. Real quick, my son, my wonderful son, when he was itty bitty, he must have been 4 years old, I think, and we watched E.T. And when E.T. was left and the spaceship took off, he just sobbed. That sense of being left behind. He sobbed, and he actually left the room, and I found him in a corner. He was just crying. And the same, what was that movie with Tom Hanks, Castaway?
Yes.
And he had the soccer ball that he called Wilson. That was his friend.
And Wilson floated away, and he couldn't.
When Wilson floated away, my son disappeared. He was older then. And I found him upstairs, and he was just really, really, really emotional. So that sense of loss, losing something, hit a soul bruise for him. And we talked about it and we worked through it. But those kinds of hardcore reactions, overdone, are usually indicating some theme of an incompletion or a wound from a past life.
So before we get too far along, let me address some of that. That reaction, think of it as the toxins flowing down the river to where you are now. It interfaces with our this life body, the limbic brain, the limbic system that I talk about in my Access Your Brain's Joy Center book. And it triggers a limbic reaction. And the way it has a past life bruise is exactly what you said. The circumstances are molehill, but the reaction is mountain. So the soul shift technique, anybody can go on the Free Soul website, freesoul.net, upper right corner, Free Soul videos, and they can be led through the soul shift. When you do the soul shift, whether it's eyes closed or eyes open, it gets you out of that limbic overreaction so you can see the ingredient of the toxin. If you don't mind my saying, you probably have additional insight. In the circumstance you described, the issue to work on is feeling responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And how can I be response able, which you've done in this life. Also realizing you can't kill soul. Even if people died and I was responsible, you can't kill a soul. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. In my case, similar circumstance that you mentioned, I laughed that I'm sure some lifetime I drowned. When I was a kid, I was doing lifesaver training. They loved to use me as the victim because they said, you struggle so convincingly. And I said, no, that idiot's dragging my head underwater. So for me, the issue revolved more around helplessness, which, can go into being left behind or dying in the cold, the Donner Pass blizzard, whatever. And here's how I worked on that to make those pieces that I didn't have in that life. We're all helpless when we pass. In that moment, we don't have control. And if people aren't at peace with that, they pass poorly and they make layers of trauma that takes them a while on the other side to clear. So what did I do practically? I imagined myself in some lifetime in different situations drowning and being at peace with the fact that I knew I was going to drown, doing the soul shift, being ready to make transition, which is part of what we do every night. We don't have huge terrors about going to sleep. So I wanted to just illustrate with your circumstance and mine, how people can go beyond just experiencing that and then address it. Soul shift, look for the essence to the issue, and what concept, approach, or technique can you use? Now, I do want to say that the Science for Living the Science for Living as a Soul 2 DVD set that Kathy helped us produce, and her wonderful husband was the videographer for, we have specific techniques to help people bring energy into those soul pearl layers. And when you have time, you tell me. I've got another analogy to the soul pearl that works for Northerners who get a lot of snow.
Oh, do tell. Go ahead. That sounds great.
How if you row a snowball downhill, it gets bigger and bigger. One of the things about superstrings physics that confused me for a while, and many people, if they explore it, is they say that some of the extra dimensions we exist in are tightly curled up little things. And at first that didn't make sense, because every time I felt like I've tapped dimensions beyond by soul shifting, it's this expansive feeling, the boundaries coming off. That's what upflow vortexes help people tap. Maybe those tightly curled up dimensions are like the rings on a tree or the layers of a soul pearl, where memory and hurts are stored, whether they're this life or past life. And that's what inflow vortexes help people tap. So for people who don't resonate with a pearl, the snowball analogy works, because what you can say is, as your snowball was rolling along downhill, if it happened to roll through a little too much yellow snow or dog poop, you've got a gunked up snowball. Same as having a sooted up soul pearl layer.
Yes. Yeah, good. Very visual. Well, and sometimes I find, because when I'm looking at an astrological chart, I can see certain planetary patterns that could suggest a theme brought forward, a sensitivity. You can suggest it, because when I look at the astrological chart, I'm looking at what are the life purpose issues here. I'm looking at the planetary patterns suggesting what this soul is trying to resolve. The tension in the horoscope suggests clearly what the soul's trying to resolve. And that's very different than a lot of astrologers who will look at the tension in a horoscope and say, you're stuck with this tension, poor thing, you're going to have a problem in this area your whole life. I go, no. You're here to resolve that, to work on it, to release it. But those tensions can also show where there are perhaps fears or vulnerabilities, things that you are trying to resolve, and sometimes they're carried over from other lifetimes. And so sometimes I find with clients, I'll bring up the theme and they'll say, my God, that's just been a horrible fear of mine, or an issue that I've had my entire life, and I'm trigger happy or trigger sensitive in that area. And I say, does it help if you just understand that it's something you are remembering rather than anticipating will come back? Because for me, I had to take many times of taking the deep breath and understanding when my small children that I had to protect, and we'd go on a road trip and I'm overloading it with supplies to make sure we have everything we need. My husband would say, stop. We had a minivan, but it only holds so much. And I had to take a deep breath. And
like one of the people that gave the food they had to the other people who were stuck.
yes, because I would come prepared. That's right. But I would have to take a deep breath and remind myself, you are remembering something. It doesn't mean you are intuitively sensing it's coming back. And that helped me. Because I do get a lot of intuitive flashes about the future. My own guidance, will say, hey, it's going to rain, grab an umbrella. But it's a very different signal when it's a past life memory, because it's intense. So sometimes it helps to just understand you are remembering something.
And I'm going to put an extra plus to that. You're remembering and intuiting that exact moment may have the missing piece in the construction site for doing the building.
Mm.
You may have the place where that memory, if you soul shift rather than stay limbic, can lead you to seeing the wisdom for how to clear. I used to say clear the soot from the soul pearl layer. I don't say that anymore, because soot and diamond are the exact same element. They're both pure carbon. So it's impurities in the soot. Think of the soot as the things we experience. Life is challenging. What are the impurities? Limbic residue, fear, anger, resentment, I should have's. And if we can clear that residue, then we can make jewels of enlightenment from those experiences. We can put it together in that way, where we're actually having a joyous journey with our tensions. And I always like to remind people, some of the greatest discoveries have come out of tension and angst.
Exactly.
So you were there at the beginning of Free Soul's founding. Make life a quest, not a test. Nobody says a quest is easy, but the moment you say quest, you're thinking exploration, adventure, I'm going to be learning, as opposed to I got to get it right or I got to be perfect.
Yeah. And tying this back to the Maverick podcast, the Maverick mentality, the Maverick personality would be looking for solutions, would be looking for ways to heal, and would not necessarily be accepting I am a victim to what's happened to me in the past. I can't do anything about it. I just have to bear these fears and deal with it. The Maverick personality is more of the problem solving type. Let me think my way through this. Let me heal my way through this. And that also goes to something that you used to talk about, which is focusing on healing pre-soul bruises. In other words, traumas that may happen in this lifetime, intensities that may happen that could become a soul bruise.
Can I say one thing before we get to that?
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right about the Maverick personality, but all pluses can have a minus. Because the Maverick personality is so doer versus victim, there's a subtle way they can fall into test mode with, I'm supposed to solve this. And what helps me is to say, I'm looking for solutions, not solutions.
Right.
Solutions is fixing it, test mode. Solutions is, what can I learn from dealing with this problem? And you're right. That also totally applies to things now. If there's issues that have no past life connection, but are really, troubling in this life, with a boss, with a neighbor, doing the same process of looking for how to clear the soot and find the wisdom can help you be making jewels of enlightenment in your now, rather than having to revisit them later.
Exactly. And the other thing that I want to focus on is sometimes if you've had a particular theme in a past life that created a soul bruise and that you are choosing in this lifetime as a soul to heal or work on or develop, sometimes it's natural to attract similar circumstances in your childhood or in your early life that just sort of poke the bruise. It's usually not hitting it really hard, but it's enough. If you have a sensitivity to something, for example, there's a certain placement in astrology. I can look at a horoscope and anticipate the possibility that someone has a really strong sensitivity to guilt, a guilt button, that if you push the guilt button, they're going to react intensely. And many times that's from past life. And then if you bring it up, they'll say, yes, my parents used guilt as a weapon. And in that case, then they've attracted something similar to irritate that enough or agitated enough to help them heal through it. And in that way, then it really doesn't matter if it's past life or this life, because it's there and we can talk about it. But it's so often that we will attract something similar in this lifetime, usually a little gentler, that carries the theme of that, because again, it agitates us to work on it.
It's a similar vibration.
Mm-hmm.
And right, it's usually not quite as intense, so it doesn't trigger the super overlimbic reaction that a past life can. But the same steps apply, with one extra caveat. You soul shift, and from that soul level, reach out a finger of your being to sense the person who's causing the irritation. In the guilt example you gave, if somebody soul shifted themselves and from that soul level reached over to the soul of the parent that used guilt as a weapon, when they're sensing that parent above the head, whether they're past or alive, they tap more into their soul energy. And whether it was fully conscious for them or not, in their heart of hearts, they thought, I need to guilt them so they'll pay attention and this bad thing won't happen to them. And, whole different topic, but you can see where reams of stuff happened with that, with souls in female bodies before birth control. I've got to guilt you. You can't have sexual feelings. Doesn't matter that you're ovulating. Your good girls don't. And because back in their day, if you got pregnant unmarried, your life was ruined, type of thing. Yeah. So they may have used the guilt because that was the only approach they knew, but their pure essence was they cared about you. They wanted to keep you safe. And that's the only way they knew how to do it. And that eases the sting of the hurt you may have felt from the guilt. You don't take it personally. You can see why they did it. Won't choose to do it with your kids or other places, but that helps with soul wisdom within you.
Yeah, and you see this often, various types of fears that can come up based on hurts that may have happened in a past life. So let's say, for example, because I've done a lot of therapeutic past life consultations with my clients where I go in, I shift to my own soul level, I work with the guides, and I go back into their past lives to look at the themes that are most affecting them in this lifetime. And we get little vignettes and we talk about those themes and how to heal. But there are times when for example, if someone had one or many lifetimes where they were being controlled or limited or told you must live within these small little parameters, and if you step outside of them, you're going to be ostracized or kicked out of the tribe or imprisoned. You must live like we want you to live. That kind of limiting control, the tyranny sometimes, the rules that are so strong. And sometimes you see that with people then who are just terrified to speak up or terrified to break a rule, or submit to authority 100% without ever challenging it, and the need to build that identity of freedom. And sometimes what we talk about is you have chosen to incarnate, let's say if they're United States citizens, you've chosen to incarnate in this time, in the United States, in this culture where you're not going to be imprisoned if you talk about being a witch, or you're not going to be imprisoned if you're gay, at least not now in this time frame that we are in right now, maybe 100 years ago, but not right now. So I find it so interesting to then look at, why did you incarnate now? Why did your soul pick this time? How can that help you achieve any kind of healing? Because it's usually a very different culture or circumstance than when the bruise actually happened.
And there are still places in the world where if you had been born there, you would have been subjected. I mean, if you were a woman born in very Taliban parts of Afghanistan, you're not going to have the opportunity you have here. Yeah. Or if you are someone who's very spiritual in a place that's very orthodox, whether it's Muslim, whatever. But before we go too far, you mentioned something that I wanted to come back to. When you say consulting with your guides, your guardian angels, whatever you call them, that's a good thing to remember when people can't reach you, that we always have help in our guardian angels. And in your, Virginia snowstorm, people stuck analogy, that help was the bakery truck. And one lady saw the truck and she called on her phone the owner of the company, and he reached the driver, said, open the doors. So that's just a reminder that there is help out there when it comes in the right time. And I'll let you tell me, but at some point I want to mention before we get off, there is something in science that makes superstrings physics look like the tip of the iceberg. And it directly relates to why we should clear the soot, the gunk out of those soul pearl layers. So,
oh yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, they have discovered an energy that the physicists say is 15 times more than what the average person thinks of as the whole universe put together. What most people think of as the universe is all the stars, all the planets, all the heat, all the light. The physicists say that makes up only 5% of the total energy in the universe. You know how the universe is spreading apart? The energy that drives that expansion makes up 75% of the energy that's out there. They don't fully understand what it is, but it seems to be flowing through the cracks of space. And if your inner soul pearl is sooted up, you're getting soda straw of that energy through you when you could be getting fire hose. When people learn how to counter limbic brain in this life with the Access Your Brain's Joy Center book, they can go with the flow no matter what they're experiencing. When they can clear those inner soot levels, they can go beyond going with the flow to glowing with the flow. And that's what the 2 DVD set you and Norva will help me do does. And it can also have physical health and longevity benefits. This one guy said to me, yeah, no, I heard about that expansive energy. It was covered on Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos. It's somehow flowing between the cracks of space. That's why the galaxies are moving apart. There's so much space between them. What the hell has that got to do with me? I said, hello, what is most of every atom in your body made of? It's not matter, it's space. If you can clear the soot levels, then you can literally be radiating enlightenment, this energy through you. You can be the river, not just the rapids, the rocks, or the rotting carcasses.
Great analogy. Great. This is wonderful information, although I would be curious how they found that energy, but that's another topic in and of itself. But, I do want to remind people, Pete's book, Access Your Brain's Joy Center, is on freesoul.net. It's a self-published book. You can get it there. The You Are Psychic book is also, which is a great book. Great book. I know when we had you on the other 2 times, I had quite a few people who contacted me and said, thank you for telling me about that book. I went and got it, made all the difference in the world.
The soul shift is in that book.
Yes.
And just at one of my Vortex talks in Sedona just recently, New Year's Day, Christmas Day, there was a lady from Israel. And, I said, it's in Hebrew. It may be out of print in Israel. And I was trying to show her how to get the ISBN from our website, because all our foreign language materials. And I couldn't do it because her whole cell phone was in Hebrew. But she found the book on the Hebrew smartphone. You recognize the cover. So it's nice that information is out there in 7 languages. Is wonderful.
Yes. That book is foundationally so important. And, if you don't understand the foundation of your own intuition, your own psychic senses, yourself as a soul, it's hard to build on that. You have to know those foundational skills and techniques.
Let me do one last thing about this. It is as an ebook and an audible book, but you can't copyright a title. So there's actually, I think, 5 ebooks with the same title. So if people remember Pete Sanders, then they'll get the correct version. But go ahead, past life.
So the last thing I want to just point out and remind people is so many of the people I talk to who are doing therapeutic approaches in their life, trying to become better souls, trying to heal, trying to bloom, trying to become more conscious, really working on themselves. It seems that there is this attachment that it needs to be traumatic or difficult, needs to be work. They need to suffer as they go through the healing. And I want to say that that's not always the case. Sometimes it is just understanding the theme, understanding what happened, and then supplying love to yourself, finding the wisdom and the growth, releases the trauma, releases that little pocket of trauma. It doesn't always have to be sad or traumatic or difficult.
And that to me is what the phrase "make life a quest, not a test" means.
Yeah.
And we have to realize we're limbically set up, even with our language. I'm going to work on that when we should be saying play at it.
Mm-hmm.
I had one lady who said, I'm never doing another workshop again. I'm doing play shops.
Mm-hmm.
I actually wore a t-shirt that said "make life a quest, not a test" when I was rehabbing from my knee replacement. I had a freak accident at 16. They said they need a knee replacement in 20 years. Teaching mind-body healing and being cheap, I made it 50 years to Medicare, got it done for free. But I'm doing rehab, and this grumpy old guy goes, how the hell do you make this a quest? It hurts. I said, well, I'm using the pain as a target to send the healing energy to the pain. And they make me do multiple sets of each exercise. So first 5 sets, I'm working at sealing off cut nerve endings. The second 5 sets, I'm picturing sprouts healing. I'm using it. So this is going to sound like, an oxymoron, military intelligence, jumbo shrimp. But you can have joyous suffering. You can be, I'm going to give credit to my beautiful bride, my wife of 44 years. She's Sedona's longest serving public school teacher. She goes, Pete, I know you think that all struggle is people are limbic, but I can't tell my 5th, 6th grade math students make life a quest, not a test. That's too new agey, even for Sedona. I just want them to know the difference between destructive struggle and productive struggle. And she says, kids, when you're in destructive struggle on that math problem, here's what you look like. Productive struggle on that math problem, here's what you look like. You're wondering how to solve it.
And it's very similar to the approach in astrology. Do you look at the horoscope and see what's wrong? Or do you look at the horoscope and see what's purposeful? Do you use it to move forward in life? Or do you use it as an excuse and blame the planets to be miserable and limited? And it's a very different approach. Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure to be on with everybody, and to everybody out there in 2022, have a joyous journey in your explorations wherever they take you, and know you're a beautiful, one-of-a-kind soul.
Yes. And as I always like to say, and I learned this from you, we, instead of saying goodbye, we say till next time.
Thank you for having me on again.
Thank you.